The 12 Labors of Hercules, Part 11. The Apples of Hesperides. Welcome back, dear listeners. Tonight we continue our journey through the labors of Hercules, the greatest of all Greek heroes. We have walked beside him through 10 trials already, each more demanding than the last. Tonight we arrive at his 11th labor, a task that would take him farther than he had ever traveled, to the very edges of the world itself, in search of golden fruit guarded by immortal nymphs and a sleepless dragon. This is the story of the apples of the Hesperides. After Hercules had returned from the underworld with Cerberus and completed his 10th labor, King Eurystheus found himself growing desperate. The king had never imagined that Hercules would survive so many impossible tasks. Each time the hero returned victorious, Eurystheus felt his own inadequacy more keenly. He knew he had only 2 labors remaining to command, and he was determined to devise a task so difficult, so far beyond mortal reach, that surely Hercules could not possibly succeed. And so the king conceived of a labor that seemed truly impossible. He commanded Hercules to bring him the golden apples of the Hesperides, the sacred fruit that grew in a garden at the westernmost edge of the world. These were no ordinary apples. They had been a wedding gift from Gaia, the earth herself, to Hera on the occasion of her marriage to Zeus. The apples grew on a magical tree and granted immortality to the gods. They were kept in a hidden garden, tended by the Hesperides, nymphs who were daughters of the night, and guarded by Ladon, a dragon with 100 heads that never slept. The king smiled as he gave this command, certain that this time Hercules would fail. For the task presented multiple impossible challenges. First, no mortal knew where the garden was located. Second, even if Hercules could find it, how would he overcome a dragon that never closed its eyes, whose 100 heads watched from every angle? And third, these were the treasures of the gods themselves. To take them would be an act of theft from the divine realm. But Hercules accepted the task as he had accepted all the others. He gathered his provisions, his club, and his lion skin and set out once more, heading westward toward the setting sun. Unlike his previous labors, however, he had no clear destination. The Garden of the Hesperides was not marked on any map. Its location was one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. For many months, Hercules wandered. He traveled through lands he had never seen, asking everyone he met if they knew the way to the Garden of the Hesperides. Most had never heard of it. Others knew only legends and rumors. Some said it was beyond the pillars that marked the end of the known world. Others claimed it was in the land where the sun went to sleep each night. Still others believed it was guarded not just by a dragon but by the Titan Atlas himself, who held the heavens on his shoulders at the world's edge. In his wanderings, Hercules came to the river where the nymphs known as the daughters of Zeus bathed and played. He approached them respectfully and asked if they knew the way. The nymphs looked at each other and then at this weary traveler, recognizing something noble in his bearing despite his obvious exhaustion. One of the nymphs spoke. She told him that they did not know the precise location of the garden, but they knew someone who did. In these waters lived Nereus, the old man of the sea, an ancient god who knew all things past and present. He could tell Hercules the way, but Nereus was famous for his reluctance to share his knowledge. He would try to escape rather than answer questions. The nymph warned Hercules that he must catch Nereus and hold him fast, no matter what form the sea god took to try to slip away. Hercules thanked the nymphs and waited by the water. At last, he saw an old man rise from the river, his beard woven with seaweed, his eyes holding the depth of all the oceans. Before Nereus could dive back into the water, Hercules seized him. Immediately, the god began to change. He became a slippery fish, but Hercules held on. He became a rushing stream of water, but Hercules' grip did not loosen. He transformed into fire, into a lion, into a serpent, into a great oak tree. Through every transformation, Hercules maintained his hold, his arms wrapped tight around the shifting form. Finally, exhausted, Nereus returned to his original shape and agreed to answer the hero's question. He told Hercules that the garden of the Hesperides lay far to the west, in the land where Atlas stood bearing the weight of the sky. He warned that the way was long and filled with dangers, but if Hercules continued westward, always toward the setting sun, he would eventually reach the place where earth met heaven. Hercules released the sea god and continued his journey. The lands grew stranger as he traveled west. He passed through regions where the sun burned hotter than anywhere he had known. He crossed deserts where the sand stretched to the horizon in every direction. He climbed mountains whose peaks touched the clouds, and still he pressed onward. His journey took him through Libya, where he encountered Antaeus, a giant who challenged all travelers to wrestling matches. This giant was the son of Poseidon and Gaia, the earth, and he drew his strength from his mother. Whenever he touched the ground, earth renewed his power, making him invincible so long as he kept contact with the soil. Hercules wrestled with the giant and quickly realized that each time he threw Antaeus to the ground, the giant rose stronger than before. Understanding the source of his power, Hercules lifted Antaeus high into the air, holding him aloft until, separated from his mother Earth, the giant's strength faded and he could no longer fight. Continuing westward, Hercules traveled through Egypt, where the king, Busiris, had a cruel custom of sacrificing all strangers to Zeus in hopes of ending a drought. Hercules allowed himself to be taken to the altar, curious to see how far the king would go with this impiety. But when the priests attempted to perform the sacrifice, Hercules broke his bonds and put an end to the barbaric practice, leaving Egypt safer for travelers. Farther and farther west he journeyed, until at last he came to the place where the land ended. And there, at the edge of the world, he saw a sight that made even his heroic heart pause in wonder. A giant stood with his back to a great mountain, his massive arms raised above his head, his hands pressing against the sky itself. This was Atlas, one of the ancient titans who had fought against Zeus in the war for control of the cosmos. As punishment for his rebellion, Atlas had been condemned to hold up the heavens for all eternity, preventing the sky from crashing down upon the earth. The titan's face was weathered by countless ages, his muscles trembled with the eternal strain, and in his eyes Hercules could see the weariness of thousands of years bearing this impossible burden. Hercules approached and called out a respectful greeting. Atlas looked down at this mortal with curiosity. It had been a long time since anyone had traveled to this lonely place. Hercules explained his quest. He sought the golden apples of the Hesperides, and his long journey had led him here. Atlas listened, and when Hercules finished speaking, something like a smile crossed the Titan's ancient face. The Titan explained that he knew the garden well. In fact, the garden was in a valley not far from where they stood. The Hesperides who tended it were his own daughters, born to him in ages past. But here was the difficulty. The dragon Ladon would attack any stranger who approached. However, Atlas's daughters would give the apples to their father if he asked. Hercules understood the problem immediately. Atlas could not leave his post. If he lowered his arms, the heavens would fall and destroy the world. They stood in silence for a moment, hero and Titan, each contemplating the puzzle before them. Then Hercules offered a solution. What if Hercules were to take the burden of the sky onto his own shoulders, just for a short time? Atlas could walk to the garden, take the apples from his daughters, and return. It would give the Titan a brief respite from his eternal labor, and Hercules would achieve his goal. Atlas would need only to be quick, and then he could resume his position and Hercules could depart with the apples. Atlas considered this. The thought of even temporary freedom from his burden was almost overwhelming. To lower his arms, to stand upright, to walk freely even for a short while, these were pleasures he had not known for thousands of years. He agreed to the plan. Hercules positioned himself beneath the great weight. He had lifted heavy things before, had wrestled bulls and lions, had carried the weight of the great boar, but nothing had prepared him for this. Atlas carefully guided the heavens onto Hercules' shoulders, and as the Titan stepped away, Hercules felt the full crushing weight of the entire sky pressing down upon him. His knees buckled for a moment. his spine compressed. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. The weight was not just physical but cosmic, the mass of all the stars and the vault of heaven itself. Hercules set his jaw, braced his legs, and pushed upward with all his divine strength, the strength he had inherited from Zeus himself. Atlas rolled his massive shoulders, stretched his arms, and for the first time in ages beyond counting, stood free. He looked at his hands, opened and closed his fingers, marveling at the simple freedom of movement. Then, remembering his promise, he set off toward the valley where the garden lay. Hercules stood alone, holding up the sky. Time moved strangely under such a burden. Minutes felt like hours. His muscles burned. His bones ached. Sweat poured from his brow. He understood now why Atlas's face bore such weariness. This was not a labor that could be endured through courage alone. It required an eternal patience, an acceptance of suffering that went beyond anything Hercules had known. Yet he held firm, knowing that Atlas would return soon. True to his word, Atlas eventually came back into view. He held 3 golden apples in his hands, and they glowed with a light that seemed to come from within, bright as small suns. The Titan approached, but he did not immediately move to take back his burden. Instead, he stopped a short distance away, looking at Hercules with an expression that was difficult to read. Atlas spoke. He said that he had been thinking. Perhaps there was a better arrangement, since Hercules was already holding the sky so capably. Perhaps Hercules could continue to do so. Atlas himself would take the apples to King Eurystheus. He had not walked freely in so long. The thought of returning immediately to that crushing burden was almost unbearable. Surely Hercules could understand. Atlas would deliver the apples and then, well, perhaps he might not return at all. Hercules felt a flash of panic, though he kept his face calm. He understood immediately that Atlas meant to trick him, to leave him here holding the sky forever while the Titan walked free. Hercules could not fight, could not argue, could not force the Titan to take back his burden. If he lowered his arms even slightly, the heavens would collapse. He needed to use his mind, not his strength. So Hercules spoke carefully, keeping his voice casual. He said that yes, perhaps that was a good idea. He was willing to hold the sky, but his shoulders were quite uncomfortable. The weight was distributed poorly. Would Atlas be willing to take the burden back for just one moment, just long enough for Hercules to fetch his lion skin and fold it into a pad to cushion his shoulders? Then Atlas could hand him back the heavens, and Hercules would hold them in greater comfort while Atlas delivered the apples. It would take only a moment. Atlas, eager to be free and not thinking clearly after so many ages of mental weariness, agreed. He set down the apples and moved back into position. Carefully, he took the weight of the heavens back onto his own shoulders. Hercules stepped away, rolling his shoulders with relief as the tremendous burden lifted. The moment Atlas had secured the sky, Hercules quickly picked up the 3 golden apples. He thanked Atlas for his help, apologizing for the deception but explaining that he had his own burden to complete, his own labors to finish. Atlas roared in anger, realizing he had been tricked, but there was nothing he could do. He could not pursue Hercules. He could not lower his arms. He was trapped once more in his eternal duty, and Hercules was already walking away, heading back toward the east, toward Greece, toward King Eurystheus. The journey home was long, but Hercules' heart was lighter now. He carried the golden apples carefully, marveling at their beauty. They never bruised, never spoiled. Their light never dimmed. They were perfect and eternal, fitting gifts for the gods. When at last he arrived back in Turin and presented the apples to King Eurystheus, the king barely looked at them. He was disappointed once again that Hercules had survived. The king waved his hand dismissively and told Hercules to keep the apples or dispose of them as he wished. Eurystheus wanted nothing to do with them, perhaps fearing that possessing such sacred objects might bring the wrath of the gods upon him. Hercules took the apples to Athena, the goddess who had guided him through so many of his labors. She received them with a gentle smile. She told Hercules that he had done well, but these apples could not remain in the mortal world. They belonged to the gods, and more specifically, They belonged in the garden where they had grown. With a wave of her hand, Athena sent the apples back to the Hesperides, back to their tree at the edge of the world, where they would continue to grow and glow with their immortal light, waiting perhaps for another hero in another age to seek them out. And so the 11th labor was complete. Hercules had traveled farther than any mortal before him. He had found a hidden place that existed more in legend than in geography. He had matched wits with an ancient titan and succeeded not through strength but through cleverness. He had held up the sky itself, if only briefly, and had borne a weight that made all his previous labors seem simple by comparison. Only one labor now remained. Hercules did not know what task King Eurystheus would devise for the 12th and final trial, but he knew it would be the greatest challenge yet. The king had one last chance to destroy him, one final impossible task to command. But Hercules had survived the underworld and the edge of the world. He had faced death and the infinite weight of heaven. Whatever came next, he would face it as he had faced all the rest, with courage, strength, and the determination to endure. But that is a story for another time. For now, let us rest here at the completion of the 11th labor. Let us imagine the garden of the Hesperides where the golden apples grow in eternal twilight, where the nymphs sing softly and the 100-headed dragon keeps its watchful vigil. Let us think of Atlas, still standing at the edge of the world, holding up the stars. And let us think of Hercules, walking back toward his destiny, having proven once more that the human spirit, when touched by divinity and tempered by trial, can achieve wonders that echo through the ages. Thank you for listening tonight. Rest well, and we will meet again soon for the final chapter of our hero's journey.